Hello all, welcome back to the Knife Edge UK YouTube channel. I hope you've subscribed already, but if you haven't and you like what we're doing here, hit the subscription button, that's really helpful to us. So what we're looking at today, well, we've got a traditional knife in front of us. This is the Northwoods, which is a brand made for knives ship free, Derek Bone over there by GEC. And this is the Lincoln Jack, which is, I think this was the last model they released at the time I'm recording this. They've got the Delta Jack coming up. But this is the Lincoln Jack. It's built on the 15 frame with this lovely clip point blade. But before we go into it any further, let's just have a look at it next to a few size comparisons. There's the LTC Nomad by Three Rivers. We'll put it next to a... That's a rather interesting picture, I think. You have there a UK PK, obviously, and as you can see, as I line the collars up of those two, you can see the blade length isn't actually massively different, but I think we all know which one of those looks a bit more threatening than the other. And then we'll pop it next to a couple of smaller Spyderco options. There it is next to the Urban, which is actually kind of maybe a smidge shorter in blade length, and we'll put it next to another Northwoods. This is the Northwoods Little Bay, which is made off of the GEC 25 frame. And if I get those sort of a butt to butt, as it were, as you can see, that's a much smaller knife, less reach on it. 15 frames actually relatively substantial in comparison. And indeed, actually, just for the fun of it, before I move on, and I promise I will in a second, in my pocket here today, I have a little number 14 frame Tido Cutlery. There we go. A little Lick Creek boys knife, and if I put those on angle, you get like a really interesting run of these sort of, you know, very pocketable, carryable GEC options. So there you go. That gives you an idea of what we're looking at here. So, what about the Lincoln Jack? Well, the Lincoln Jack is instantly, the moment I saw it, one of my absolute favourite designs that Northwoods have done so far, and probably one of my favourite looks for a traditional knife that I've ever seen. This one here is in burlap, and while I absolutely lust after a mammoth one, or maybe a giraffe, or, to be honest with you, I kind of lust after every single one of these. If I had the available funds, this is one of those knives that I'd probably have one of every cover material, as ludicrous as that sounds. But I just really like it. So let's get on with this. I should say before we go any further, this is 1095 steel, so there is a bit of oil on the blade. If you see any little streaks or whatever, that's what you're looking at. So, Northwoods. Northwoods is an old brand that was resurrected, as many of you watching this will know. I will be boring you to tears now, by Derek Bone at Knives Ship Free in the States. And they have a really bold and interesting aesthetic. As you'll have seen with the Little Bay that I had on the table a couple of minutes ago, that had a very, very similar look to it. And what they do effectively is they leave the heat treat scale on the flat portion, the unground portion of the blade, although they grind it before they heat treat it, so it's nice and flat and even. And then they stamp Northwoods in, and by and large they normally have a long pull on them rather than nail nick as well, which is generally my preference. Aesthetically, I tend to like Northwoods knives. I often find that they're sort of kind of, while in terms of the overall construction, how they're made, the steel's involved, they are absolutely a traditional knife, you know, with the addition of some more modern cover materials occasionally. They just have a slightly more modern meets traditional vibe about them than a lot of the other GEC offerings. Indeed, when I had this little 14 out, I think you'll agree this jig bone is much more, you know, truly traditional than something like the Northwoods look is. So what we got here? Well, we've got a beautiful clip point blade. That is one of my clip points for me. They're really hit and miss. I either absolutely love a clip point or it does nothing for me. This one is about perfect. It's long, it's elegant, it's got a fantastic flat here, lovely little rise into the belly, nice acute tip, swedge on top is beautiful, and then that's all highlighted, as I say, by that heat treat scale. This is 1095, as I say, so this is a carbon steel. It will rust and patina if you don't look after it, but yeah, I don't have that much of a problem with it. From there, we've got cap and bolster on this particular model. This is built on the 15 frame, as I say, beloved of many TC offerings from, you know, Tom's Choice offerings from GEC as well. You've got the point mark shield there, which is taken into the blade. That looks to me like it's probably nickel silver, and there's a nickel silver pin there. The rest of it's carbon steel, so you've got carbon steel backspacer. What am I talking about? Carbon steel spring, carbon steel liners, and carbon steel cap and bolster. This is all done in a satin finish. You'll generally find that the bone versions tend to be in polished and still with the satin blade though, and the Mercator versions and that sort of thing tend to have these satin bolsters, which are lovely, really, really nicely done. Bolster transitions on this particular knife are lovely and clean. There's very, very little there to complain about. Slight snag on that top bolster, but everything else is very, very clean. Very flush on the back spring, no issues there. It works really well in the open position. And then if I take it, they're slightly proud, which is, in my experience, very normal on a 15, on the half stop, and then completely flush again when you're in the closed position. As you can see, they're very, very, very compact when they're closed up. Pocket really, really well a 15 frame. It's very much a little big knife. You've got quite a lot of reach, but it's still very, very small and very discreet in the pocket. As you can see here, the centering, it's not bad, but it leaves a little bit to be desired. I generally have found that Northwoods sometimes have issues with that. Everything's very snug inside, so it's not the actual centering the blade. What it is, and we're getting on to our first nitpicks here, what it is the fact that the grind on the backside isn't quite even with the grind on the front. Now that's really quite normal with these. Most things in GEC, most things that GEC produce in-house are very traditionally produced, and so, you know, hand-drawn swedges and stuff like that, they're very, very hard to get absolutely bang on even. I'm not sure if this is a hand-drawn swedge, but I imagine it probably is, and that's probably why you have that issue. Apart from that, everything is extremely cleanly done, and this is a really nice example. Walk and talk, this particular, it's got a nice half stop, nice little bounce on the half stop once you flush these out, and then once you get it into place, lovely. One thing I do tend to find with the heat treat scale, I'm doing a lot of that mixture. Who does that sound like? I'm not sure. Anyway, what you tend to find with this heat treat scale, sometimes the veneer slips, if you notice that, guys, and I stop being quite so calm and professional. The heat treat scale is obviously in there where the actual knife is pivoting within this bolster. And so it's not quite as smooth as you would get on, you know, something like this one I showed earlier, where you've got, you know, effectively no, you know, a polished surface all the way through, or at least a nicely satined surface. So when this, it just snaps shut in a slightly different way. It's not better or worse. There's just a slightly different feel to a Northwoods, but I think it's made mainly because of that heat treat scale. So yeah, there you go. That is the Lincoln Jack. There's not a huge else to say about it, really, much more to say about it. It's just an absolutely excellent traditional knife. I think it's incredibly pretty. It looks really poised and beautifully designed. It's one of the best looking traditionals, I think, that's been released in a long time, and because of that particular aesthetic that they go for with the Northwoods knives, it has a certain modern look to it at the same time. Just in terms of safety, the kick works really, really nicely to give you control over this blade. Hopefully you can see there. So this isn't shutting on you if you're holding it in that position. And like any 15 frame traditional, ergonomically, this is lovely. You know, you can have all the choils and finger grooves in the world, and believe me, I love all that stuff. But there is something just very, very reassuring about, you know, doing some good work, some cutting with a lovely thin behind the edge, nicely made traditional. So there you go, guys. One of the best patterns, probably certainly one of the most loved patterns in the GEC catalogue, put to work by a fantastic design. It's great. I love the Lincoln Jack, and I need more of them. Wah! Catch you soon. Bye-bye.